He just had it in his head that he deserved a certain amount of money. Now, there's nothing wrong with knowing and owning your value. They talk about work your wage. I don't know if you guys heard that like thing of like only work the amount that you're being paid, but also like work your worth too. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Behind the Booth. I'm Jade, and with me, as always, is my award winning producer, Heather.
And on this channel, we talk about wild stories from Comic-Con vendors because Jade is a Comic-Con vendor. She has her own booth. She has her own product that she designed herself, and it's amazing. So you guys should check it out. On our list, we actually have all the Comic-Cons that she's going to be going to. I really need to update that because people are going to look at this now and they're going to be like, what? Those were like a year ago. I will update that, I promise. And you can go and see her, find her at her booth. We would love to meet you. Today, we're actually talking about something that is... we just did an episode about money and how to keep track of money. Now we're going to talk about a little bit of money mindset because as a business owner, when you have these booths, you are a business owner, right? Like you have to run it like a business, even if it is a hobby, right? It's like a hobby business. And I don't know, a lot of people, maybe not everybody, have really weird mindsets around money and especially accepting it for something that you created. I know there's some kind of stigma around that like freaks people out. So Jade, speak to that a little bit.
It's interesting in our culture how we handle money. There's a few things within at least the American culture that we don't talk about. We don't tend to talk about money. We don't tend to talk about sex. And we really don't, or we're not comfortable talking about religion, generally speaking. And there's, of course, the topics that everyone says, like, don't talk about religion, don't talk about politics.
Yeah.
There's a reason because it makes us uncomfortable. I have a mentor, her name is Janine Bolin, and she's done a lot of work with this guilt behind accepting money, at least for myself. And I don't truly know where it comes from, but I've met kind of two people. There's people that feel guilty about money, and there's people that come off as being entitled about money. And I'm going to talk a little bit about both of them and really what it means to you as an artist. So Heather is 100% right. Your art, your business, whatever it happens to be, you need to treat it like a business, even if it's a hobby. Um, and the way that Janine put it is in order to keep creating, you need to have money. Otherwise, you're going to do another job where you can't create because you still need to pay your house. You still need to have food. You still need to have a car. Or at least in the United States, we need to have a car almost guaranteed
Yeah.
because it's such a massive landmass area. Or even if you don't have a car, you need to have transportation of some kind. So that might be a bus or a train, unless you literally work above your job, and that's freaking cool and go you. But we need to have income in order to live. Back in the day, anthropologically speaking, if we needed something, we just went out in the world and got it and then came home. That's not really how things are done anymore. You can't, well, at least, I mean, I'm in Colorado, so maybe you can just walk up the street and shoot a rabbit. But if you're in a place where, you can't go outside and hunt wildlife and eat that wildlife, you have to go to a store. And in some countries, that's just a crazy thought of like, I'm sorry, you can go somewhere and they just have food waiting for you. Like, yeah, we have that. Like, what? And
Yeah.
it's a really unusual idea. But in order to do that, instead of having the skills to hunt, we have money. Money is our new skill. And it's very difficult to think of it in the sense of like, well, I made something and it's hard to put a value on it because it's not like other things that we're culturally accustomed to. You go to the doctor and the doctor's office says, okay, your visit is $107. And you're like, okay. And you pay that. We don't really think about, oh, well, I don't want to pay a doctor $107. Well, he takes 69. Like we don't think of that kind of stuff. We just say, okay, and we hand them the money. We go to the store and go to buy, vegetables, and it's like, okay, carrots are $2. We're not like, this carrot is not the best looking carrot I've ever seen. I'll give you $1 for it. We just accept these prices. And in the art community, that's not how it's seen. And people can say that it's a luxury item. People can say that it's not something that's needed. So I'm going to give a comparison with that as well. If you go to the Coach store or any kind of designer store, which is not something you need to survive. It's not a doctor, it's not carrots. I don't know if you can survive off carrots, but go you. Maybe you're a rabbit listening to my podcast. But you go to the Coach store and you're like, "Hey, I really want a laptop bag. I need one for work, but it's a luxury item. I could go to Walmart and get one for $10." If you go to the Coach store, they're gonna be like, "Yeah, that's a $1,200 bag." And even though it's a luxury item and it's an art item, you can't be like, I would not have chosen that shade of green for that bag, so I will give you 800 for it. They're gonna be like, "Get the fuck out of my store."
Hmm.
Because that's just not how things are done. But when the art community, people will look at a piece that you're selling for, I don't know, $2,000 and be like, "I'll give you 500 for it." If they did that anywhere else, they would be not only shunned, but thrown out and told not to come back. But that doesn't happen for us. People look at something and be like, "I can't believe you're charging for that." Now, some people look at it and be like, "Oh my god, I can't believe you're charging for that. That's great. Here's my money. Take my money." Um, but it's subjective. So really what determines how much art is worth? I asked this question in my class actually. I was like, "What determines that?" And the common answer I got was demand, which is a good answer. Materials and prestige. And they gave
Yikes.
the Starbucks example, which I love this example. So how did Starbucks decide that a large coffee with, let's do pumpkin spice since it's a season. A large pumpkin spice is
Yay.
$6.50. How did they decide that? Was the
Yeah.
question I gave the class. And they said, "Well, is it demand?" I was like, "Well, no, it's not really demand. People want coffee, but there's what, 5 other large franchises that sell coffee
You can
and
literally buy
sell
it at a gas
spice."
station.
Yeah. So it's not exactly demand. And somebody raised their hand. They're like, "It's what people are willing to buy it for." And I said, "Yes, it's what the average person is willing to pay for it." So Starbucks said, "Okay, we need to make between $5 and $9 per cup." Let's just say that that's what they said.
Yeah.
And they tried these different prices, just like we're going to try different prices at our booth, and figured out that people are willing to part with $6.50 for a large pumpkin spice. They're not willing to pay more. They would absolutely pay less, but this is the best that we're going to get out of 90% of people.
Yeah.
And you're still gonna have people that go to Starbucks and be like, "Oh my god, you want me to pay $6.50 for a fucking latte?" Like, you'll hear that still.
Yeah.
And I mean, depending on where you are in the country, it will definitely differentiate how much you spend on coffee. But generally speaking, that's the price. That's the national price. And we know, okay, Heather and I are going shopping. I want a pumpkin spice. I'm gonna pay $6
Hmm.
plus tip or whatever. Because I always tip. We've been over that. So that's how those prices are worked out. Now, when I did my booth the first year, I tried different prices. I tried my pins at $5. I tried them at 2 for 9. I tried them at 15. And I found, generally speaking, the population across the United States, because I've done so many of these, is willing to part with their money for $10 for one of my pins. And I also looked at other people around me, other people that were selling similar items. And I say similar items because a lot of people that do pins do them out of it's like a metal that has like a little gold outline. And for the life of me, it's not coming to mind what it's called. But they're metal and they're poke pins. They're the ones that put
Yeah.
holes in your clothes. So I saw that they sell those between $7 and $15. That was kind of what I saw. So given that mine are made out of acrylic, they're laser cut and they're magnetic, I was like, I'll go somewhere in the middle and I'll try 10. And it's been selling without conflict, which is great. I could probably sell them maybe for 15 if I was willing to, have more people walk away. And that is a
Yeah.
whole other marketing conversation that we can have another day. But you need to kind of figure out what the population is willing to part with. And I say part with their money. They're not giving you money because giving somebody money is a gift. If somebody was giving me money, they would hand me $20 and not expect anything back. That is a
Hmm.
gift. They are parting with their money of $20 to take 2 pins that I've created and copywritten and make by hand with them. So that is kind of how we have to think about this idea of money and guilt because they're not giving you money, you're not asking for money. They have
Hmm.
something you have something they want. You told them what you want in exchange for the thing that they wanted.
Yeah.
And then they get to decide if they're going to give you that money, if they're going to sorry, use the wrong word there. If they're going to part with that money and hand it to you.
Yeah.
Or if they're gonna go up a couple more stalls and find a different pen that they like better. and maybe they'll part with $15 for that one.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the surrounding idea of guilt with money.
Well, and I like that you talk about, you tried different prices like at different shows and stuff because it can be really tempting also on either end of the spectrum to be like, "Oh, I'll negotiate on anything like, please just give me a price and that's what I'll sell it to you." Or you can be on the other side and be like, "This is my price, it's never changing." And like these people are all just stupid because they won't pay it, like, and no, it's like you got to work with it a little bit because otherwise you're not going to make good sales over here and you're just not going to make sales over here. So you have to be able to kind of take your pride out of it. Like make sure you know what it's worth, what you're worth, but don't like be so precious about it that you think everybody else is stupid because they won't pay that price. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm. And so that's the other side of things is the entitled person. And I
Ah,
say entitled not in a negative way, although it has an extremely negative connotation. It's what people have convinced themselves or have been shown is what they're worth. So I came across a videographer a long time ago that I saw his prices and we were talking about it because at the time I was a videographer as well. And I was like, yeah, so I see that you do this. Like, how did you come up with that price point? Like, that's crazy. What kind of cameras are you using or this, that? He's like, I'm just that good. And that's just what he said to me. He's like, I'm just that good. And Heather, you've met
okay.
this guy, so you know who I'm talking about.
You could see
I
my
was
in
like,
my face. I'm like, I know who she's talking about.
yeah. And I was like, so how long is the shoot? He's like, well, it takes as long as it takes. I said, okay. I was like, so what are you shooting with? He's just like, well, it doesn't matter because I know how to use it.
Good
And I was like,
Lord.
okay. And he was like, I just, I don't understand. I'm so good, but I am not making the money every month that I should be making. I was like, well, how much do you think you should be making? He's like, well, my cost of living is around 3 grand a month. So I think I should be making like 21. And I was like, really? And in my head, I was like, unless you're giving blowjobs out, I don't know how you're going to make that money. Like that's what? Um,
Maybe he
and for what he
is.
was
You don't know.
producing. And he just had it in his head that he deserved a certain amount of money. Now,
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with knowing and owning your value. They talk about work your wage. I don't know if you guys heard that
Yeah.
like thing of like only work the amount that you're being paid, but also like work your worth too. Like know your worth and stand behind it.
Hmm.
There's a point where it becomes arrogance and there's a point of just confidence. So there's two huge differences between those words, arrogance and confidence.
Hmm.
I do my very best to come through with confidence rather than arrogance.
You do.
But it's subject to opinion, it's like when we watch, sports like gymnastics or figure skating, they have like a set of curriculum, a set of things that they look for, but judges will say things like, oh well, her bra was showing, so we're going to deduct that, or I just didn't really think that she stuck that landing, or he could have done a little bit tighter of a tuck on that, like it's subjective of what we think. So it is a hard divide to not come off as like, well, I just deserve that. And no, I work really hard. I have a talent, I have a skill, and you want that talent or skill.
Hmm.
So there are the two sides of that. How I've kind of come up with a formula for an artist that is actually lives right up the street from me. They do spray paint paintings, but they look like acrylic, but it's all done in spray paint.
Amazing.
That was the coolest thing I've ever seen.
I love
And
those.
they were like, "Yeah, I'm trying to get rid of some of my stuff." I'm like, "What do you mean get rid of it?" She's like, "Well, I'm out of room and I just like to do this for fun." And, I'm like, "Okay, well, have you tried selling them?" And she's like, "Well, nobody would buy them." I'm like, "How do you know? We tried?" She's like, "Well, I mean, I don't know. I could part with this one for like maybe, $5, $10 and I'll show you guys pictures of them because they're amazing." And it was a full-size canvas, like massive canvas. And she does like moons and stencils and stuff to make it look just badass. Just like the
Yeah.
stuff that people are paying so much money to go see the eclipse of
Uh-huh.
that just happened. Like she's drawing that stuff. She's painting that stuff. And they're all hand done and they're all one of a kind. She
Yeah.
doesn't do any replication of any kind. And I was like, "Wow, these are great." I was like, "Well, would you take 50 for it?" And she looked at me like I had literally used like a hate crime word, you know what I mean? And she's like, "You'll give me 50?" And I was like, "I will pay you 50." I'm not giving you anything.
Uh-huh.
I'm paying you $50 for your work. Is that okay? Or do you want me to pay you more? She's like, no, no, 50 is great. And so I think I bought 6 pieces from her
Mm-hmm.
to put in my new house. That hopefully is happening soon because I have almost no artwork actually, because my house is so small. So I had a few pieces, but I'm like, no, I want to add these and get some extra inspiration. And so I was like, "Hey, come with me to a farmer's market. We're gonna sell more of your stuff under my thing." And she's like, "Okay, how do we do that? How do we come up with the numbers?" And she's young and very excited, because that's that young like 20-year-old thing that I
So
have
much
not had since
energy.
I was like, I know, I was down to do whatever. I said, "So here's the formula. Figure out what it costs for you to make your item, then double that, and that's the very least that you are willing to part with it for." And she's like, "Okay, well, it takes me about $15 to make it." I was like, "So that's not including your time, that's just the canvas and the paint, right?" She's like, "Yes." I said, "Okay, so we're gonna double that, so that at least you're making $15 an hour. And then from there, we're going to double that and be like, that is the lowest you'll negotiate to."
Mm.
So if we're looking at $30 now, 60. And I said, so when people come up to you, you tell them that you will sell that piece for 90. When they say, how much is that? You say 90,
Mhm.
especially at things that are subjective like this, because she doesn't have a replicable thing. Whereas I have like all my pins, they take the same amount of work, same amount of time. They're all $10. She has something that fluctuates. And this is one of the questions that I got at the speaking event I was at, is like, how do you determine things that are one-offs, that are one of a kind? This is basically the formula that I've been taught and that I use. And when you have somebody say like, okay, well, unless they throw a price at you, I had somebody literally, she was out there in her garage, see one of her pieces, be like, would you take 200 for it? And she's like, yeah. I was like, this is 225 or something, like, negotiate a little bit. But she's like, yeah, I'll take 200. I was like, oh gosh, I gotta work with this bitch. But basically saying like, yeah, have a number. So if that piece that you said that you wanna take 90 for it. If they come up and say, "Will you take 180?" You'd be like, yeah, I could do 180. That sounds good." And then
Yeah.
just receive that money, because now you got paid twice what you
What you
wanted.
would have been
And
willing
somebody
to
off the
part
street
with
comes
it. Yep.
up and says, "How much is that one?" You say, "Oh, it's 90." "Oh, I've only got, 50 with me, or, 60." I'm like, "Well, I could probably do 75, but know that you need to stay between those 2 numbers of 60 and 90, and know that you're still gonna come out ahead." That was basically the number plan of that one. And some people won't budge at all. Some artists are like, "No, it's $200. That's just what it is." And eventually, somebody will want to buy that.
Mhm.
It just may not be something that is going to get sold that day
Yeah.
or that weekend. It might be one that you hang on to. That comes back down to like the pawn shop theory. If you've ever watched things like Pawn Stars or any of those shows where they're like, well, I've got to factor in how long it's going to stay on my shelf, finding a specific buyer, if I have to ship it, all that kind of stuff. That's a
Yeah.
whole other can of worms that I am not getting into. Watch the show if you want to see how they negotiate for that. But that was more or less my advice on that, and just being able to stick with those numbers, because she was willing to sell that piece for $15 and instead she got 200 for it.
Yeah.
So that is a huge difference. And she's like, wow, I might be able to actually quit my job and do this full time. Because she lives at home and she works a part-time job somewhere. And she's like, but if I can sell these, I don't have to work there anymore. I'm like, yeah, yeah, that would be great, huh? Because you can actually do something you enjoy. And so I'm doing some mentoring with her, but that's what's really important with knowing your numbers and standing by that, because she just wanted people to love her art.
Yeah.
I can totally appreciate that. That's great. But there's nothing wrong with being paid for what you love.
Yep.
So if you're doing something that is special, that is something that they can't just go to Walmart and get, that they can't
Yeah.
find on Amazon and buy. When you type in something into Amazon, there's like 15 retailers that sell the same thing. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about these very unique items that have never been done or invented or made before, and being
Exactly.
paid your value.
Yeah. And this is all completely personal, right? I mean, like we do talk about the numbers and how, like double this, double that, that's the lowest you'll go to kind of thing. If like if you are like, this is just my hobby and I really don't need this to live off of, which a lot of people do, they have these hobby businesses, which is wonderful, and they can create some of the most amazing stuff. And And so then your brain's like, well, since it's just my hobby, I don't need this to live. I'm only going to charge this much. How does that feel? Does it suck? Because it might. Like if you charge way, way lower than you should, it's not going to feel good. And that's going to take away from the joy of the hobby. And so it's not just about like, I need this to live, because a lot of us don't. A
Mhm.
lot of us do, but some of us don't. Like, if you don't need this to live, it doesn't mean you downplay what you're worth, you know? I mean, and then of course, if you do need it to live, then really don't do that, because like you got to get paid. You got to eat. You got to live somewhere. So, on either end of the spectrum, you got to be able to figure out how that works for you and how it makes you feel. And like I've heard people be like, well, if I charge too much, that's gonna make me feel weird. I'm like, yeah, you may feel weird for a second, but then you're gonna be like, actually, that was awesome. Like that felt so good. I got so much more money than I thought I was going to. Your weirdness will fade.
It will. It's like riding a roller coaster. Like there's that
Yeah.
weird feeling at certain points, then you get all like the endorphins and the joy. It's like
Yeah.
that.
It's that
And
top
I'll
of the
give
roller coaster where you're like, but then you're like, whoa, that was fun. Yeah.
yeah, like, "Wow, I did the thing." And it really does feel good. And I will give one last example. If you are a hobbyist and you have no intention or desire to what we call make money and do that kind of thing, there was a lady at my figure skating club that used to knit leg warmers because she just wanted to knit and crochet, and that was her joy. She sold them at her bare minimum cost. And when I say that, it literally was what it cost for her to buy the yarn. So that
Yeah.
way she could keep funding her hobby of going to Walmart and buying more yarn.
Yeah.
And that was, again, she's receiving money for it. It wasn't a donation or anything like that. She said, those leg warmers are $10 because I needed to use 2 balls of yarn to make them. Each ball of yarn is $5. And that was great. So if you, I mean, if you do not want to do this full time, which a lot of the people that have talked to me about this stuff want to do it part time or full time. Most of the artists I talk to want to get to full time. That's how to do it. If you're somebody that just wants to keep enjoying your hobby and just be able to replace your supplies, think of it as replenishment. Just charge what your supplies are costing you. But
Yeah.
no matter what, have fun with it. It's so important to have fun and enjoy what you're doing, because the only thing we can't replace, the only thing that's non-renewable is time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and a special thank you to Nerdy Girl Podcast for producing this episode. We'll see you next time.